Hey everyone, welcome to Lawyers Who Stream, episode 7. So you didn't get hired back. We have two lawyers here that talk about the subject of what happens post-articling, what happens if you're not hired back to your articling job, and what to do to move forward and seek out that associate position. I have two awesome guests joining me. First, we have Maya Kanani, litigation counsel at a large insurance company, been working there for 3.5 years. She is a Windsor Law alumnus, like myself, and is called to the
Woo!
bar in Ontario. And also, she wanted to make sure that she insists that insurance defense is not as boring as you might think. Jennifer Philpott, you may know her from Twitter, is a workplace lawyer practicing in Oakville, Ontario, providing advice and representation to individuals, employers, and management on a wide range of these issues. She has her JD from the University of Ottawa and a Bachelor of Business Administration from Brock University. So great to have you both here. I'm going to start things off just by telling a little story about myself, just to lead into the discussion.
Sure.
So, I articled at Canadian Civil Liberties Association, which some people might know. It's a nonprofit, non-traditional articling. Great experience. Love everything that I learned there. But I also know going in that as a nonprofit that very rarely expands, was likely not coming out of there with a first-year job. So, kind of going in immediately, I knew I had to start networking, had to start looking at where I'm going to go next in the following year because nothing was really certain. So, kind of leading off the discussion with that, I wanted to talk to each of you and find out because I thought that friends of mine who weren't sure what their hire back situation was going to be, would be under a lot more stress, because they weren't sure if they had to be looking sooner or later. So, just leading to the discussion, start with you, Jen. What sort of
Sure.
position were you in, kind of coming to the end of your articling term, in terms of your hire back status? What did you know at the time?
Sure. So I'll preface this by saying that I think 2020 was a very different year for many
Yes,
obvious
very,
reasons.
very fair.
I mean, in the past, so I articled at a large firm in London, Ontario,
Mhm.
that has other offices around the province. And in the past, I would say that like higher back rates at firms are all different. Certainly, my firm had had better years than others. If we're going to qualify better as more people getting hired back, which as an articling student or even as a summer student, you like to see, gives you hope.
Mhm.
Um, and and so leading up to things, I mean, I remember, I think this all starts for me with like St. Patrick's Day, like March 17th, because that was the day that I had to tell my firm whether I wanted to be hired back or not. And I did. Everyone in my class or my cohort, I guess, at my firm wanted to be hired back. We all applied.
Mhm.
And that was also about, I don't know, like there's my cat. If anyone can hear, she wants to chime in, apparently. My cat's here too.
Sasha's ready.
Yeah, Sasha's ready for her 15 minutes of fame. So around that time was really when we started going remote. I mean, I think Friday the 13th was the
Yes.
announcement that everybody
Yeah.
shouldn't send their kids couldn't go back to school. I remember waiting in a grocery store for like an hour to check out. It was mayhem. And so around that time, around St. Patrick's Day, I remember I applied to go to hire back, and we were supposed to hear back, I think, within a few weeks. And then a few weeks turned into about a month. And then a month turned into a month and a half.
Mm.
And so we just didn't really know. So we were watching other folks at other firms and trying to see what was happening in our city in London, where I was articling, and also just in the province to get a sense of what was going on. And I think just generally there was a little bit of uncertainty. So in terms of going to be hired back, I mean, I personally thought that I was a good candidate. I had done a lot of really good work for the lawyers that I worked with. Every conversation that I had leading up to moving into remote work was positive, and even through remote work, it was still positive. It was just things kind of slowed down to a grinding halt
Mhm.
with work. I think, as many people probably experienced in private practice.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, so that was sort of like the element. I didn't know what was going to happen. As we got closer to the date of finding out, it was sort of 50-50. It could have gone either way. And ultimately, it was unfortunately the case that I wasn't hired back, and neither was anyone from my cohort, which was surprising to us
Wow.
because of
Mm.
the past years. There had at least been and so the firm I was at takes usually between 5 to 6 students in the London office.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
we'd had pretty good numbers before, at least like the lowest I think was like 2 people out of 6 getting hired back,
For sure.
but nobody was a surprise.
Yep.
So given
But
like,
like you said,
yeah,
unusual year, right?
unusual year, and
Yeah.
given the circumstances, when I reflect on it now, makes 100% sense.
Mhm.
At the time, it was a bit like jarring, but again, unusual year.
Yep. Yeah. So Maya, how about you? It's been a few years now. Obviously, not
Yeah,
articling during a pandemic. What was your experience
yeah.
like?
So my firm was a medium-sized personal injury firm. They had hired back pretty much every previous student that they'd had.
Mm,
So I kind of went into articling with the mistaken belief that as long as I performed well enough that I would get hired back. And I mean, I never had complaints about my performance or anything like that. So probably around the 9.5 month mark, got called into the articling principal's office,
mm,
and he was like, due to financial issues that the firm is having, we're not hiring you back. And that was a huge like kick in the gut shock to me because of the fact that there had been consistent hire back of the previous students. Like half the firm was former articling students that had stayed on, half of like the 15 lawyers, which is a pretty high number.
yeah, for sure.
So complete shock to me, and I kind of went in go thinking that I was going to be back as long as things went well and I performed well.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that students should never take for granted, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So my experience is slightly different with that, and I mean, I didn't take it well. I bawled my eyes out in my articling principal's office. And then I bawled my eyes out again when I would go talk to every single lawyer. And I'm not a
Totally
crier
understandable.
either.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things like, I love the firm. I love the experience. I love the people. I didn't think I would like personal injury, but I really, really did.
Hmm.
And so I just gutted. But I think in the end it worked out. But it's hard to know that at the time when you get
Definitely.
that.
100%.
When you're in it, you can't really see the big picture, and even if
No,
you look back on
exactly.
now. So it sounds like both of you pretty big shock, despite like very different
Yes.
circumstances,
Yeah.
Yes.
which can be destabilizing. So Maya, what did you do next? Like you might take a little break after, but how did you sort of move forward from
Um,
that?
so I didn't want to go on EI. We obviously, as a student, because you're completing a contract, you have the opportunity to go on EI after
Hmm.
you're done articling. So I started looking for jobs like the next day after I had been told. And I actually had a couple of interviews before I even finished my articling.
Hmm.
So Ontario reports, big one for the
Yep,
area that I think in
totally.
all areas of law, really, if
Yeah.
you want to work at a bigger firm.
Hmm.
So I started like hustling, contacting anyone who I had met during articling who, like, for example, when you attend in personal injury, you're going to attend discoveries, mediation, started reaching out to defense counsel to be like, hey, is your firm hiring the first year call? Let me know. So that's kind of was like one of the first steps. And then I had a lot of pushback because I hadn't been called yet, because I finished articling early May,
Okay.
waiting to call to the end of June.
Yeah.
So took a break after I realized that there wasn't much of a point of hustling as hard as I was, if that makes sense.
So were they not so going into interviews for associate
Mhm.
positions, even if they knew you were being called in June, they still were resistant to giving you a shot, or?
Yeah, some of the firms, despite seeing that on my resume, were looking for someone to start right away.
Oh. Hmm.
Which I mean, I think I was pretty open in my resume about the fact like not yet called to the bar.
Huh.
So I don't know what the surprise was there, but after like 2 or 3 interviews, I just like held off until after I was called, because it wasn't going so well. But I mean, I think, and I really do think though, a break after you kind of get that, especially if you're in Jen and mine's position where it's a complete and utter shock, unexpected, is really
Mhm.
important
Yes.
Definitely.
to kind of gather your feelings.
And Jen, how about you? What was your process after?
So it was a weird process again because we were remote.
Mhm.
So my principal, articling principal, called me and told me, it's just been a terrible year, and then after, well, she told me I wasn't hired back and was very sympathetic, and she basically said, at whatever you need, I'll be there to help you. I had a very good articling principal,
Mm.
and then we sort of had a group chat. I'm very good friends with the other articling students, and
Yeah.
we got on a 5-way call, and we're just like, is it the same across the board for everybody? And that's how we found out that it was. And sort of after that, I mean, that day, I have a very good friend who sent me baked goods with the hope that well, in the morning, right before the call, it was like 9 in the morning when I found this out. Yeah, it was very nice of her. And she sent me baked goods, basically said the box was like, good luck today. And I ended up eating probably half the baked goods within like the span of the morning, because I was just sort of like, in my feelings, clearly,
Mhm.
and just shocked. I was shocked at first And then I think I went through like all the stages of grief.
Yep.
Not in one day, but in a period of time.
Yep.
I was very upset for a while. I definitely cried. I think I called my parents and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, because it's also a pandemic, and we were watching closely, like I said, the other firms in London, and some firms took back their students, some firms didn't.
Yep.
And then so it sort of opened up a whole thing for me of, okay, and I applied back to be a family lawyer, which is very different than what I do now, like very different. And so I sort of took a step back and thought, okay, maybe this is a good thing in a sense, because it's going to cause me to reflect on where I want to be and what I want to practice, and to think critically about it. But in the moment, I mean, that was like maybe like about a few weeks later. In the moment, I was just like, I have no idea what I'm going to do, and I need to figure out a plan. I'm also very type A, admittedly. I think many people in law are. It sounds like,
too.
yeah, it sounds like Maya, like you had the exact same experience in terms of you're like, I don't want to be on EI. I'm just going to go try and find a job. The only thing I will say for me was I was watching all these other firms hire back their students and thinking they don't need bodies to fill any vacancies. You know, they've taken back their students, or they're not hiring because it's pandemic.
Yeah.
And it was the very early stages. So I found it in May as well. And I finished articling about a week later, and sort of was just in this finishing stage where, you know, home stretch of articling was kind of slow. We had a few matters to pick up at the end, but truly I felt a bit blindsided. But again, like I say, in retrospect, it made a lot of sense given the economic situation.
So I noticed that both of you actually did, you sort of shifted practice areas coming out of articling into your new jobs. Did you have kind of a deliberate process with that? Did you seek out coaching? Did you start writing stuff down? Did you do any sort of training to look into that? Or what sort of spurred you to switch practice areas like that? Jen, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So I was at a full service firm, and I got to do rotations through the firm. We practiced pretty much everything except for criminal law. And I think it just, I reflected on what the opportunities were that were out there. And I actually had an opportunity to interview with a provincially prominent employment and labor law firm about a month after my articling ended. They were from their London office. And that sort of rejigged my focus. When I went into law school, I actually wanted to be a labor and employment lawyer, and sort of got, you know, as one does in law school, you kind of go down the path.
Yeah,
see
sort of meander. You
really
really like this prof, don't like this course at all.
Yeah, exactly. You dip your toe into different subjects and areas. And I knew ultimately I wanted to be involved in litigation. Like that was an area that I feel strongly connected with and spoke strongly to me. And family law kind of jumped out as being fascinating on paper and also fascinating in practice. It just so happened that the jobs that I was looking at were really not in family law. There weren't very many of them available. I don't know if that's normal. I'll get into, I guess, a little bit later what I did in terms of my actual job search, but it was just a bit of a winding road, and I took sort of opportunities that were available when they came up, but really in terms of narrowing the practice area down, just really sitting and thinking critically, will I enjoy this? You know, is in the case of family law, you know, there's a lot of dynamics at play. So the emotional aspect of it too was something I really wanted to think about, you know, critically. Like, did I like it, or what was it that I liked? Was it the people? Was it that I worked with? Was it the actual practice area? So I think it was a lot of self-reflection with, quite honestly, a lot of time on my hands to sit with my thoughts.
For sure. Maya, how about you?
So I'm actually in the same area of law, just on the opposite side of the table.
Gotcha. Right.
So I mean, I was looking broadly in civil litigation. I was open to other opportunities as long as I got to litigate and be in a courtroom, because I think that's what I'm best at and what I enjoy. It just turned out that I ended up at a major insurer in pretty much the same area of law. I do a lot more property work now, and obviously I didn't really do that at the plaintiff firm, but I ended up pretty much in the same area. It just kind of happened. Wasn't like and it's funny because I tell my parents all the time, like, I didn't set out to become an insurance defense lawyer.
I don't know many people who do.
No. Or like, you know, or really even a personal injury lawyer. Just opportunities kind of fell the way that they did. And I'm really happy with the work that I do now, but it was the same area of law. So I didn't have like that level of reflection that I guess, Jen, you would have had, where you were thinking about, do I want this or do I want to change what I do? Pretty much the exact same thing, just other end of the table.
So got a few people in the chat now. Just a reminder, anyone who wants to ask questions to Maya or Jen, totally open. You can just drop a comment in the chat and I'll see it and ask them. But we're going to move to Jen. You mentioned what you actually did for the job hunt. Maybe you two can talk a little bit about that. You mentioned the Ontario airports, Maya. Where else did you go to network to find what positions were available?
I just Googled firms that did civil litigation work, and I found the folder actually after we kind of figured out we were going to be coming on here today on my Dropbox, and I counted. I applied to like 100 random firms. I just,
wow,
you
that
know,
eclipses my articling number, which was I think over 50 at one point.
yeah, I don't know. I was hustling hard, I guess, but it was one of those things where I like Google was good. Some of the smaller firms post on Indeed and Kijiji,
Yep.
which don't seem like typical job sites, but they can be. LinkedIn is another big one. I think I also like reached out, like I said earlier, to people that I had sat across the table from and asked them if their firms were hiring, that kind of thing. Some of the lawyers that I worked with at the firm that I was at also recommended, if they heard of job openings, would recommend me for them or would call me and say, hey, this firm is hiring, call them right now, type thing. So I was lucky I had a good support network as well.
Great. And Jen, doing everything remotely, a little different maybe, and also different climate at the time you were looking.
Very different.
Talk a little bit about that. What was that
Sure.
like?
So the first thing that I did under the advice of my principal was get reference letters from whomever would write me one at my firm.
Very good.
Which I would recommend to anybody listening to this. Get your reference letters and get them early. Some lawyers will want you to write your own. Which at first I was a bit put off by because I thought, why am I writing my own letter? This feels weird, but it was actually a nice exercise because I got to say what I wanted to say about myself. And quite honestly, what I thought might've been a bit, inflated and I don't really like to brag about myself ever, just generally it's kind of uncomfortable. But I actually got to write quite nicely about myself and the lawyers pretty much accepted everything I wrote, which is true. Of course, don't write falsehoods about yourself in your recommendations. No, so that was the very first thing I did. And I talked to lawyers at my firm to see if they could connect me to anybody. I think that's good too. Use your resources. If you've got resources in your personal network, in your professional network, tap into that. And then I think I took like a month off because it was a pandemic and it was pretty apparent no one was hiring. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? If I had been hired back and it was a perfect world, I would have probably had about 4 months in the summer. I wouldn't have started until September. That's usually how my firm worked. And so I thought, okay, well, you know what? There is really not a lot I can do right now. And articling was pretty grueling. So, as it is, and to end in a pandemic. So I figured, I'm going to take some time off and enjoy. And that's to say, like, I had a fantastic articling experience. I had a lot of training, and I think it prepared me well to leave and to do what I do now. And great principals and mentors as well, who I'm still in touch with. And I really respect the people at my firm. But I think everybody, once articling is done, you're like, oh my goodness, this is a long 9 to, what is it? Is it 10 months? 9 months?
10 months.
10 months.
Yeah.
10 months. Now I think it's cut down to 8 for some people, but who might have articled in the pandemic.
Yeah, I think they may have, there was some sort of arrangement there. We could forego the last couple of months if they hit. Yeah.
I think everybody is just burnt out at the end of articling. So that's probably a nice way of putting it. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to take some time to myself and then regroup. And then when I did regroup, I did similar to Maya, except there weren't really job postings. So it wasn't a situation where I found many firms looking for or being willing to take interviews from a brand new call. Most of what I did at the urging of a good friend of mine was to cold call and cold email. And so that's what I sort of set on a track of cold calling and cold emailing, probably similar to Maya, over 50 people. And this was maybe between the summer, so like July, well, not even July, maybe end of June, beginning of July, and my first post articling job, because I'm currently in my second post articling job, and getting that position in the beginning of September. So fortunately, my gap wasn't too long. It was pretty standard, but I mean, I won't lie, it was nerve-wracking the entire time watching a very uncertain pandemic unfold and everything, and not knowing if and when firms would be ready to hire new calls.
Yep. Yeah, that was in some ways it was a good summer, last summer, that sort of break that we had that everyone was
Mhm.
forced to take. And I didn't know what I was doing in the fall until August. That's when I got my acceptance letter to U Ottawa and could start arranging for that. But Jen, you mentioned cold emailing and cold calling, and something that I struggle a lot with personally is that exactly. Cold, like I don't want to come off as rude or needy or
Mhm.
Mhm.
whatever. So I was wondering if both of you can actually just give some advice on cold
Sure.
emailing,
Yeah.
like sort of how you go about it. So Jen, start with you.
Sure. So again, I was really pushed into it for the same reason, Teddy, that you're probably averse to it.
Yeah.
I felt like, what do I have to say to these people? They're busy people. They're trying to navigate the pandemic. It's the summertime. They're probably going to tell me to either, thanks for your call, but no, or call back later. And I mean, some did, but most didn't. I was pleasantly surprised. And so what I did was I would write emails first. I didn't
Hmm.
just randomly cold call people,
Yeah.
which I guess you could do depending on how brash you want to be. But I thought email's safe. So I emailed people and I made sure to email folks who were in a position that they could make hiring decisions. So
Mm.
I liked to
Yep.
talk to associates at firms to get an idea of the culture and sort of, on a more intimate level of like, what's it really like working there? Because I think
Yep.
associates are going to be frank with you.
Mhm.
But in terms of being on the radar of people who are going to hire you, especially in an economically uncertain time, that seemed to be like the best bet. So I spoke to some managing partners or senior partners, heads of practice groups at firms. And my bridge to speaking with them really, truly wasn't always about finding a job. I was very aware of the fact that most firms had made their hire back decisions for articling. And if they weren't posting publicly, we were in a pandemic, it's probably not shocking. So my approach was, I want to know more about you and your practice area because this is where I see myself going. And can I have, a few minutes of your time to
Mm.
just talk with you, get a feel for who you are. We can do Zoom or we can do a phone call. And I'm just, I'm very passionate about XYZ area. I had narrowed it down to basically 3 practice areas that I'd be willing to go into by this point. And so I talked to folks. I mean, mind you, though, if I made a connection with somebody in a different practice area, I was open to hearing about it because, quite honestly, for me, it was litigation was sort of the drive. And there were a handful of areas that I thought I could fit in. So I think it's just, you got to get over the hump of doing it.
Yep.
It's kind of
Hmm.
awkward at first. And what I realized was the worst they're going to say is no, or even maybe some people this might find this worse or not so bad, but they're just not going to reply to you.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so you move on. I think I made an Excel spreadsheet and I kept track of who I
I did the
talked
same
to
thing.
and
Yeah, I did the
and
same
when
thing
I
at one point.
talked when I talked to them and when it was appropriate about 2 weeks later, maybe send a follow-up email and say, because
Mhm.
lawyers are busy. Like they love
Yeah.
talking about themselves too. That's what I found. And
Yep.
I admittedly now, I mean,
Hence the
I'll talk.
entire concept of
Yeah,
the show.
Yeah.
exactly. So, you're never offending people. I think that's the thing that I was kind of worried about. Maybe not offending, but taking up their time.
Yep.
And,
Mhm.
and I found most folks were very generous with their time, or at least directing me to other people or other resources that could help me.
Great. And Maya, how about you? What was your approach?
Very similar to Jen's actually, which was emailing someone who was like a managing partner or who was listed as someone who would be involved in hiring.
Mhm.
I also looked for people who went to Windsor as well. I mean, Teddy, you can identify with this,
Yep.
but we are a very, very tight knit,
Totally.
supportive community.
Mhm.
And I don't know if all the law schools have that. I think Jen, you probably did at Ottawa and still do, but
Yes.
not every school's
Yeah.
like that, right? So if I saw an associate who's like a senior associate, but who went to Windsor, sometimes I'd reach out to them as well.
Mhm.
And like much like you would email, and if they, I got a lot of like no replies, and maybe that's just because of the people that I was emailing, but the ones that did reply and who were willing to have a phone call or a coffee, there were a lot of people that were really generous with their time. And even like you said, like even it was just learning a new area of law or just hearing their advice on what they did. Ended up meeting up with a couple of people who were in our position, didn't get hired back after articling, and they
Mhm.
kind of gave me tips on how they went about getting jobs and finding things. So it was kind of the same thing where it was cold email, and I'd put a cover letter in there or a resume in there too, and say, but I'd love to learn more.
Same.
Mhm.
And if they responded and they were happy to have a call, I would do that. I felt that calling out of the blue was a little intrusive.
Mhm.
And as
Mhm.
someone practicing now, if you like, I would be fine with someone calling me out of the blue, but it would be a little bit weird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And so that's why I think, Jen, the strategy that you said was email, and if they email you back, then they're interested in at least having a conversation. And if anyone emails me at my current job, I always email back and I'm happy to chat. So I think that that's just the easiest way to go about doing it if you're cold calling, I guess, cold emailing.
Cold emailing.
Yeah. So that's definitely what I did as well. We were very similar in our methods, the charts and everything.
Sounds like it worked.
Again, type A.
I think so, I think so,
So this might be a bit of a tough question. I'm not sure if either of you will have an answer or an experience with this, but when you go into a job interview and they see that you just articled but now you're looking for a new job, is that brought up, and how do you respond to that question? And Maya, I'll start with you.
Yes, it's brought up, depending on the firm. But there was never kind of oh, you didn't get hired back because you did something wrong. It was more, oh, you didn't get hired back at your firm. Like, they understand. Like in Jen's situation and in mine, it was a business decision. It had nothing to necessarily do with your ability to do the job. And the fact that my articling principal and other lawyers at the firm I was at told me, like, give out my phone number if they want to call me, I'm happy. And like Jen, like you said, get the reference letters. So it was never like a thing that I think firms looked at negatively, because they understand that these things happen. And Teddy, like to your situation, sometimes firms just don't have the capacity to hire back ever, really, especially when you're in the situation that you were in. So I never found it was a problem. If they asked me, you didn't get hired back, I would say, yeah, it was a business decision, and here are the great, like, I had a great time, and here are the people you can talk to if you'd like to hear more about my work. And I don't think that was ever a problem, really, for me in job interviews.
And Jen, how about you?
It's the same experience. So in the reference letters that I mentioned, I think every single reference letter from different lawyers said this, at least had one thing the same, which was that we couldn't hire Jennifer back due to economic conditions or economic uncertainty pertaining, at least in my case, pertaining to COVID-19. And I also think I benefited in some ways collectively, because no one in my year was hired back immediately. One person was hired back a little bit later on, and that was under different circumstances. But I think collectively, like, if anybody else from learners where I articled had applied at any other to, like, we'd applied to the same job, for example, they would have seen that and they would have been like, oh, okay, like, or they would have called my principal or any other of my references, and they would have said, Jennifer wasn't hired back for the reasons that I've said. So they were very frank with the fact, like, my principals and mentors were frank about the fact that, like, put this out there and let people know. And I don't think I was ever asked in a demeaning or sort of intrusive way. I think people pretty well understood, maybe again, due to COVID, sort of blessing and a curse, that it was circumstances beyond my control. And I think as employers, they also could see, oh yeah, like, we didn't really know what was going on in May 2020. So this makes sense. This story lines up. I think just focusing in the interview on your skill set and what you can bring to the table for the potential employer is probably the best thing that you can do. And the rest will sort itself out.
Great.
Absolutely.
Really solid. Thank you so much, both of you. This has been full of really awesome tips. I've learned a lot. I'm sure lots of people will benefit from this. Going to wrap up in a few minutes after a couple questions, barring anything from the chat. But is there any other, like, programs or groups or professional associations that you might have joined? Anything at all that you would recommend that people make sure to insert themselves in before looking for an associate job post-articling, or even during articling? That might help them later on.
100%. I will jump in on this because it's something I wanted to bring up, and I have another sort of sidebar that I'd like to bring up too.
Go for it, for sure.
Maybe the sidebar first, which is that not getting hired back. I mean, I didn't maybe make it apparent, but it did take, like, a pretty decent toll on my self-esteem and at the beginning, and how I felt about myself and my self-worth, because I think as lawyers, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and we really value and link, our work to our self-worth. So I would just say, I say this to people all the time, but be kind to yourself. If you're watching this and you didn't get hired back, or if you're watching this and you're going through articling and then you don't get hired back, or even in any circumstance, because it can be very easy to criticize and look back and be like, oh, if I'd only done this or that or this other thing, then maybe my situation would be different. And nitpick, exactly. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. Pardon the very, cliche expression, but just, in the recognizing that mental health is something that's, that a lot of people in our profession struggle with, and trying to create a good, healthy baseline. be kind to yourself and don't take it personally, because chances are, like just like Maya and I, it's not a personal decision at all. But in terms of resources and groups to join,
Hmm.
I really benefited from going, and this actually helped because it made me feel like I wasn't alone, even though I knew I wasn't alone because my peers didn't get hired back, but that it wasn't just an us thing. I went to, and I don't remember if it was the Women's Law Association, it was some women's legal group, and I forget which one specifically, but and just pay attention to these groups if you're in the OBA or the Advocate Society or any of
Yep.
these kind of memberships or affiliations.
Hmm.
They held like a session. It was like a round table with Zoom breakout rooms. I think it was the first time I'd ever been in a Zoom breakout room.
Oh yeah.
And they talked to students. It was a bunch of lawyers from different firms in Toronto and across the province who spoke to articling students ending their term about what to do if you weren't hired back. And
That's
it was one of the
excellent.
very,
That's
it
a great
was.
panel.
It was one of the best things I'd ever done. If anyone has the power to make those panels in other groups they're involved in, they're fantastic, because people just want to know that they're not alone, and they want to know what they should do to get to the path they want to be on.
For sure.
Yeah.
Am I happy?
Yeah, so I would also suggest something, reaching out to from Windsor, for example. There was a bunch of us that didn't get hired back, and it was kind of nice, like you said, to have that support group. I only articled with one other person, and that person ended up staying on at the firm we were at.
Hmm.
So as much as I would have loved to talk to her about it, she didn't understand what I was going through.
Yeah.
So talking to other Windsor students who didn't get hired back, and there was a good number of us. The Law Job Exchange group on Facebook, I don't know if a lot of you are members. There's like nearly 15,000 people in there right now.
Oh yeah, I don't use Facebook anymore, but I was on there
Yeah.
for quite a while, and yeah,
Yeah,
people pretty active.
That was
yeah.
very helpful too.
I found, like, there was a couple of jobs that I applied to from there. And also, if anyone who's watching this does want to talk to someone and wants more tips, like, reach out to me
Likewise.
through Twitter, whatever.
Yep.
And
I got your
happy
Twitter
to...
handles below your windows, by the way, so people know.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I can think from seeing Jen chat today, like, we're both happy to talk you through, and offer support and resources as well.
Excellent. Just one question coming in now. Any advice for applying to jobs when it's not clear when we'll actually get called to the bar to be able to practice? The LSO is doing calls from May to July. We don't get a specific date. So this is pretty specific to the times, but I know both of you dealt with this whole not being called thing. Any advice about that?
So my lovely Saturday morning email telling me that I became a lawyer,
wild. That's so wild.
came to me during that sort of self-imposed vacation. So it didn't affect me too much. But actually, I should say, it was the self-imposed vacation, but I had one interview going with this employment law firm that I mentioned. And it was just over a long period of time. It was several interviews over the course of a month. It was quite long.
Oh, wow.
And anyway, that obviously didn't pan out. But while the interviews were going on, they knew that I hadn't been called yet. And so I think for the most part, your experience sounds a bit different, because some firms seem to be apprehensive to you starting, and they didn't know. And that seems to be because maybe like a time sensitive thing. But I think if the firm isn't super time sensitive, and hopefully whoever wrote this question, you're going to be called in June. You can also write to the Law Society too. I knew people who requested an earlier call. I don't know how like common that is, but, and you have to also figure in, the timeline of when you started articling, when you ended, and make sure that's all good. But certainly contact the Law Society, because sometimes I feel like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And especially last year, I found if I contacted them about a question, they would update my information online or whatever it was I needed them to do. So definitely, if you feel pressured in that situation, reach out, but just tell the person who's recruiting, that you plan to be called, you've completed all the licensing requirements. And sometimes if they want to hire you, they might be able to also call the Law Society and say, hey, we're waiting for this person to get their call. So those are some options.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think just being upfront about it, especially with the climate, look, like Jen said, I've completed all the requirements. The Law Society is saying between May and July. I will, as soon as I'm called, I'm ready to go. And I think with the times, a lot of firms are a little more flexible as well. I think I was just in a weird situation with a couple of firms. I don't think that's like a typical experience.
Yeah, that sounds odd. Obviously, it sounds like something that's kind of out of your control, right? Like either the firm
100%.
really cares and needs you to start right away as a called lawyer, or they can wait and they want you as a candidate. So I'd say, just be upfront, do what you can with Law Society, and Yeah.
And just
It's
make
kind of out
sure
of your
it's
hands.
at the top of your resume where, like somewhere near the top,
Mm.
because that's usually where people look, is called plan to be called, or
Yeah.
expected call date is whatever date you want to put there.
Mhm.
So that maybe in my situation, I probably didn't make it clear enough, to be honest, that I hadn't been called yet. It was on my resume, but maybe it should have been right at the top. I don't know. So if you do that and, the firm says we need someone right away, then there's much you can do about that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks again to you both. Really wonderful to
Yeah.
have you on talking
Of
about
course.
this. I know it's a tough subject. So next week we have Kyla Lee coming on. She is a BC
Awesome.
lawyer, going to talk all about driving
exciting.
offenses is our plan. And we have an awesome month of guests booked up. So also
Fantastic.
still looking for more guests. Anyone who wants to be on the show who's interested in this, interested
Nope.
in talking about their experience.
You have
She's getting her 15 minutes.
She's coming.
Yeah.
Oh, she's camera shy now. Or maybe not. I don't know. She's sort of
She
looking
knows,
like a deer in
she
the
knows that we
headlight.
want to see her, right?
Yeah, she knows. She's like, okay, they're ending the show. Time to make an
Yeah,
entrance. Yeah.
exactly.
But yeah, very exciting month ahead. And thanks again to you both. Like Jen and
Oh.
Maya both said, you can find them on Twitter.
Yeah.
Their handles listed below. Just reach out to them if you have any questions about
Please do
Anytime.
reach
how
out.
to move on
Yes.
past articling.
Yeah, that's not just lip service. If you have any questions,
Yep.
please reach out. We could probably have talked about this for like an hour and a half because it's an in-depth
definitely.
process. Yeah.
Teddy
Sure.
kept 2 talkers on track.
Yeah. No, he definitely did.
I'm getting better. I got notes now. Those forms I
good.
sent out really helped. Yeah, it's a work in progress. This show. We've got some
Like everything.
hopefully some new graphics coming soon. Fingers crossed.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
All
Thanks
right.
again.
Thanks, Teddy.
Thanks so much for having us, Teddy.
For sure. Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.